Well, folks, welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast on Tuesday, January 16th. And we're going to be talking about some early stuff with spring training. The Pittsburgh Steelers just got knocked out of the playoffs yesterday. So for some people that might not be into hockey, it might be baseball season to you already. And pitchers and catchers report very, very soon. So it's going to be here before you know it. We're going to talk about the top positional battles, some early risers and fallers predictions for spring training, and more on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, here we are once again on the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith, who is hopefully going to have his voice throughout this entire episode after yelling. I cannot say the obscenities that I said in the bar watching the Steeler game yesterday, but we'll just say I called the referees zebras for probably about half the game that I was watching. Joey Porter Jr. also hope you're fine after you got blasted in the back of the head as a defenseless player. But, we're just going to discount that too. But we're on the Locked On Pirates podcast today, Gary. If you guys want to hear all about that stuff, go to Locked On Steelers. I'm sure Chris is all over it. Trust me. Sure, he's all over it. And, Gary, first of all, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm feeling a little better. I was under the weather over the weekend just a little bit, but I'm out of it now. I think Michael wanted me to be on his show this weekend, and I was like, I don't got no voice, brother. So,
no. And me losing my voice, obviously, for a much different reason. Mother Nature not making up her mind on the weather, but something she will be able to do in making up her mind, hopefully, on the weather. And what we're talking about today is spring training. And you look at spring training, it's January 16th. It might feel very far away for where it's at right now. But folks, I think I tweeted about it the other day I actually tweeted about it yesterday. We are about 6 Mondays away from spring training starting. And that does not include when pitchers and catchers report. It is going to come just like that. We're in off-season mode still. We're doing about 3 to 4 shows a week. Obviously, when we come back to the regular season, Gary will be back on Mondays. I'll be doing 5 days a week. Probably going to have a bit more of a schedule this year as far as segments go. So I always tell you guys, message me on what segments you would like to see. But I really do believe, folks, that I think that this is just it's going to come out of nowhere. Like you're going to wake up one day, and next thing you know, you're going to be seeing Mitch Keller throwing to Jason DeLay and Henry Davis in bullpens. You're going to see some of these highly touted pitchers that we want to see in Jared Jones and Anthony Solometto even probably down there at some point trying to figure things out. And when you really break it down, Gary, there's a lot to look at with this roster as currently constructed. And I think both myself and yourself believe that the Pirates probably still aren't even done adding, which I think makes this even more interesting, where you look at a roster right now where you can confidently say there's probably about 3 or 4 different positional battles on this roster right now that are all going to have intrigue, that all have multiple players that are going to be in play for those spots.
Right. And I think something interesting is kind of taking shape a little bit, because we talk a lot about the options that the Pirates have, like at one position, the outfield, right? The corner outfield position, or who's that extra outfielder? You got like Joshua Palacios in there, Edward Olivares, Connor Joe's even kind of in that conversation a little bit, G1 Bay. You could even take it down just a touch further and you start hitting, like your non-roster guys, like Matt Gorski is probably got some kind of a claim, right? And you've got Matt Frazier probably has a chance to impress a little bit. And Kanan Smith and Jigba is on the roster, but he's somebody. This Celestino and Billy McKinney they brought in as NRIs, I don't think they really have a shot to make this roster. But one thing I do think,
before you mentioned Joe Perez, Gary, he's another guy.
Yeah, Joe Perez is another one, right? So, and it's not a joke to bring these guys up, because here's the thing. they have done something pretty smart here. Edward Olivares has an option. Connor Joe has 2 options. G1 Bay has 3 options. Joshua Palacios has an option. They don't have to bring any of them.
No.
They literally could have anybody win these spots. They really could. And they can use options and not lose some of this talent. It's not make the roster or lose them. So I really think we're going to see the most pure and legitimate form of roster battle. It's fun when it's like that, man. When you can't sit there and go, well, he doesn't have any options. He has to make it. That's the best kind of camp battle, man, right there.
Yeah, and I agree 100% because you're also looking at a lot of people saying, well, let's say Palacios or this guy doesn't win the job at a specific position. And we're kind of talking about the outfield here because I do think that's one of the most intriguing ones just because of the pure quantity of players. And a lot of people would say, well, yeah, if he doesn't make the roster, why not trade him for something we need? But also, we saw it last year, folks. Injuries are a major part of a baseball season. So if you can go into a season where you could say, hey, by the way, Joshua Palacios and Joe Perez and Matt Gorski are all in AAA. It could come up at any given time and help if, say, a Edward Olivares or a Jack Sawinski or a Brian Reynolds ends up being on the 10-day IL. And you can say that that drop off isn't as drastic as it has been in years past when we've seen players get hurt. That's a great thing to have because then in that stretch, yeah, you might not have one of your better players in the outfield, but you can also say, yeah, I think we trust this guy enough to at least bat like 250 and play average defense in the meantime. And you mentioned the options. You look at a guy like who was it that had 3? Was it Connor or it was Connor Joe that has 2? Who has all 3 still?
G1 Bay.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at a guy like G1 Bay, if you want to, if he doesn't make the roster, starts in AAA, you could do that multiple times with him if you really wanted to. And that's something that Ben Cherington, I think, has preached throughout his entire time of being the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates, is he wants that flexibility on his roster to be able to interchange things without losing guys. And that's something that a lot of teams, folks, can't do. You see it happen a lot where these guys get designated for assignment because they just literally have nowhere to go.
Yeah,
And for
it's a lot easier when you're coming right out of the fresh rebuild because
Mhm.
you build it that way. It's hard to keep that on the tracks. You'll
Yeah.
see like Atlanta started to struggle with that. That's why they started trading off some guys like that they couldn't count on anymore to stay healthy, like Soroka.
Mhm.
That's why they packaged him in the deal just because they can't afford that with no options. So I think you start to see teams get congested here and there. Pirates, I wouldn't say are congested yet. And just having options doesn't mean that they're going to survive the 40 man
No.
because they may need removed from that. But once spring training starts, there'll be a flood of space available because they'll start pushing off the 60-day guys back to the IL. So the only one I think they might not is JT Brubaker because I think they might think he's ready to start practicing with the team and getting into the flow. But the others, Mike Burrows and Oviedo, are for sure going to go on the 60 days. So you're going to get a couple extra spots. And that's not the worst thing in the world either because you'll be able to keep a little more depth.
Yeah. And honestly, you look at that too, and you could also argue that maybe you see a move that like for a free agent that's still available in spring for the Pirates when they are able to do that. And it also means you don't have to sacrifice somebody right now to come off the 40-man roster. Rather, you could just wait like month or two and wait for these guys who might even still be available because I hear the name Michael A. Taylor a lot and I'd love him on this roster. But really, it's a tough decision as who you take off the 40 man and like designate if you do get him right now. That's not an easy decision that the Pirates have to make. Who's to say he's not available in 2 months? Maybe you do that something like that as well. And I like that you mentioned pitching as well, Gary, because I do want to get into the pitching side of things as well for that, because there are a lot of pitchers that I think Pirates fans are going to have their eyes on in spring training. But before we do that, we're going to talk about FanDuel and eBay Motors. Well, I can't use my bet on the Steelers to win $150 anymore because they don't play again until September. But folks, if you still want to be involved in the playoff action and you want to ride the hot hands that you're seeing across the league right now, like the Houston Texans or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, folks, win or lose, you could get $150 in bonus bets with one $5 bet because there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. So the app is super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. The best way to find popular parlays and more. So visit fanduel.com/locked on and make your first bet a layup because FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is also brought to you by a returning sponsor, eBay Motors, because, passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. And lots of you like the stash, but if you want to see more of the stash, you can also find this show on Locked On Sports Today because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows like Locked On MLB with Paul Francis Sullivan covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And I almost want to make the joke, welcome back to the commercial break, or after the commercial break. It was like an NFL commercial break, it felt like. Before all of that, thank you to all of our sponsors, by the way. You brought up pitching, Gary, and I found it interesting that when this offseason started, the big news that we get to kick off pretty much the whole offseason is that Johan Oviedo is going to miss all of 2024. At the time, that really meant that you have one guy that you can really rely on in the pitching staff at the time. That was Mitch Keller.
Yep.
Since then, they've added Martin Perez, who is a 2022 All-Star and was just kind of buried in a very good Texas Rangers rotation. You look at Marco Gonzalez, who was one of the more consistent pitchers in all of baseball from 2018 to 2022, obviously has that nerve damage issue that could end up being an issue and is tough to come back from. But if he stays healthy, you know what you're getting from him. They have not really added anything else outside of that as of right now. Now, I'm not saying they won't, because there's a very big possibility they do. But then when you're talking about spring training and you shift your focus to the rotation specifically, you kind of deep dive into these guys that a lot of people last season were saying, oh, well, he's just not who we expected him to be. Like speaking on Quinn Priester or Rowanzi Contreras, who had his immense struggles last year. Luis Ortiz, who was a flyer in the system in 2022, didn't pick up that same steam in 2023. That's not even considering that you have to start talking about guys like JT Brubaker, who will make a comeback at some point. Mike Burrows, who could come back in the middle of the season late in the year and potentially make a push for a late push in the rotation. You then have Jared Jones and Anthony Solometto. Is Paul Skeens really the guy that a lot of people expect him to be, where he just comes up laser fast and just dominates the minor leagues? That's a lot of pitchers to be considering for realistically 2 spots. And that was without me really even mentioning Bailey Falter, who's even still in this mix as well. And I think pitching as well is going to be very fun to watch, Gary, in spring training, because you're going to obviously, I think a lot of eyes are going to be on Priester, Ortiz, and Contreras, because those are the guys that I think the eyes should be on. And Contreras is one of those guys that I think is going to come back from his struggles last year. I'm not saying he's going to fully come back to his 2022 form, but I do think in time, Contreras will probably become at least a passable back end of the rotation player. Now, that could happen to any number of these pitchers. Any number of these pitchers could take that next step and be that guy. But you're looking at the amount of this, Gary. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for the Pittsburgh Pirates to have that many pitchers that you're going to have to get eyes on in spring?
It's always a good thing to have more pitching, always. And
Yep.
a lot of it's under control. You got 3 filled spots. You got Mitch Keller, Martin Perez, Marco Gonzalez, like you said. Right now, let's just forget that we think there's something coming. Right now, there's 2 open spots. All those guys that we mentioned are going to fight. Anybody that's on the 40-man has an advantage. Anybody that has no options has an advantage. Okay, so Contreras and Bailey Falter are the 2 that don't have options. And I say that because those are the 2 that they can't just go, nope, not good enough. Got to go down to AAA. They can't just do that. They have to clear waivers. They have to take them off the 40-man and then send them down. And Bailey Falter could flat out tell them he doesn't want to accept the assignment. So, like, if you want to keep him, he's either got to make the rotation or you got to put him as a reliever. And I don't think he has a reliever's repertoire.
No.
So to me, he's a guy that's probably going to not even make it to this competition. You know, I could see him being DFA'd, clearing waivers, re-signing with the club as an NRI. You know, something like that with Bailey Falter, because they do seem to like him. So I think they wouldn't mind keeping him around. But I don't know that he's really in this fight. If he is, I think they've screwed up pretty severely. Man, I don't know. There's a lot of guys I want to see. But, like, if you've given up on Quinn Priester, I'm sorry, you just don't understand the game of baseball. You just don't. That doesn't mean that he will ever be good. That just means, like, it ain't time to give up on a kid like that. And like, you want to look at that 7 ERA and freak out and act like that's him in stone. Man, I could give you a list of 30 guys that are in the Hall of Fame that started out just as bad. Like, you really and truly just can't be that way with rookies. And when you got rookies, it's the way it's going to be. This spring, I bet Jared Jones looks better than just about every pitcher that we have. And he will not make this roster because he's not on the 40-man. I mean, there's just a lot they're going to have to work through, I think. That 4 and 5 spot, if they leave him open, I feel like that could be taken up by 10, 15 different pitchers this year. Not kidding.
Yeah, and that's why I think that it's still very early, like, in the process before we even get to this point. And I would assume now it might not be a player that the fan base is like, whoa, this guy's going to like change things, but he's also going to be a pitcher that I think if they go out and sign one or trade for one, that you could at least confidently stick in that 4 spot and say, okay, now we're at 1 spot. And I think that's kind of the same sentiment that everybody wants at this point. Is there is a major difference, folks, and it might not seem like a major difference, but there is a major difference in having 2 open spots versus 1, because then you're looking at that 1 open spot, and you're basically going to probably look at how you mentioned he doesn't have options, Roansy Contreras, and say, hey, you're going to be in this spot. We're going to give you time to figure it out. But then if you don't, there is a plethora of pitchers that can come up here and take 1 spot.
Or he looks like garbage.
Yeah.
And you just DFA him and like he clears waivers because everyone else has seen it too.
Mm-hmm.
And then you work with him later. Like, it's not the end of the road necessarily for everybody like that. Maybe he needs deconstructed. Maybe it has done that already this offseason and he shows up looking normal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I think we're probably panicking about a guy that we all had in pen for the starting rotation last year and didn't pan out. And that happens. You know, I mean, like, that's just kind of the way this goes.
Prime
Pitching
example
is
is
hard.
Alek Manoah in Toronto, folks. I mean, you look at him literally in 2022, he received Cy Young votes and ended up in single A in Toronto's system at one point because of just how mechanically messed up he was last year.
Like,
It,
let me try real quick. I just want to try a different way of illustrating, I think, why we can list off all these options and still think they need a pitcher. Okay. Because, yeah, that is a ton of guys to go through, and it's crazy to think they will. But let's say I go out and get Michael Lorenzen. He's a starter. Don't worry about whether it's 2 years or whatever. Just let's say we get him for this year. You plop him right in. He's your 3 or 4 in this current rotation. You toss him right in there. He's going to give you innings. He has given innings. That's what he does. He also has shown an ability to go to the bullpen, so that's a bonus. So has Martin Perez. I don't think that's necessarily a coincidence that a couple of these guys have some experience doing both. But you have him. He fortifies that rotation a little bit. Do I think he's better than Luis Ortiz? No. I think Luis Ortiz has more experience. He'll be better. But right now, Michael Lorenzen is a better bet that you're going to get what you need. Staying in the game, innings, okay? And the other thing, too, I think we have a leader in the clubhouse for this battle because you wanted to talk about battles. So let's talk about real battles, right? Because we can list off all those pitchers. Let's talk about somebody that really should be in this. Luis Ortiz should really be in this. And I say that because as bad as the perception is that we have of how he pitched last year, he did not look good. But he only had a 4.78 ERA. We've certainly seen that worse, right?
from Mitch Keller, even.
And in 86 innings that he gave this team last year as a struggling rookie.
Well, and I would
Way
also
too many
argue to ask.
walks.
I would also argue to ask too. He's a guy that kind of has that repertoire to move to the bullpen if needed. I mean, he's
Yeah.
a fireball thrower. If he could get that velocity back, I mean, that's interchanging. You could do that
Yeah.
if you really wanted to.
The walks got to get under control. If he gets his walks under control, Luis Ortiz is a gamer. I mean, he's given you innings already. The reason I'm shocked by it. I felt like so negative about his performance last year until I started going into the numbers, and I still feel negative. A whip of 1.696 is downright gross.
Yeah,
okay,
it's horrible.
It's downright gross. I mean, his walk to strikeout ratio, it's almost 50-50. Like, it's awful. Okay, it's not like I'm saying there's nothing to improve, but this dude misses bats. And he gives innings, and he's got that horse kind of body that makes you feel like he's not going to fall apart. He's a guy that, to me, if he's even close, I give him an edge because he's already shown he can do it a little.
Yeah.
So
I can agree
camp
there.
battles.
Yeah, and I can agree there as well. And that's something where you're like, a lot of people listening to the show can listen to that and say, going into spring training, think of the guys that are at the top of the list. Think of the guys that are up there, but also know that these guys are not 100% stamped in. That's the thing that I think this whole episode is trying to do, is these guys are not 100% stamped in. And we're going to go look at one more positional battle that I also think is a little bit interesting. That's probably going to be my favorite one. And that's the middle infield over at second base specifically. But before we do that, we're going to talk about JCE Medical. Folks, it's important to empower yourself in times of need, because I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? Because according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than a significant other or one of my family members getting sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of JCE Medical. The JCE case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, and more. This stuff could happen to any of us. So visit jacemedical.com, that's JASE, and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order. Now for the final segment of today's episode, and probably my favorite positional battle I think that we're going to have, because Gary knows, and I let him know it all the time, that number 60 or whatever his number is now, I don't know if it changed. I haven't kept up with jersey numbers. Liover Peguero is one of those players that I always urge you guys not to get stuck to players. And then I'm doing it myself because I love Liover Peguero. Gary and I spoke about it a lot, about him potentially being a leader in this clubhouse just because he oozes positivity and oozes like just everything good about being a young baseball player. And you look at last year, he comes up, you see some of that power that I don't think a lot of people thought he had, that he just kind of all of a sudden showed in spurts. And all of a sudden, the whole conversation switched from, well, Nick Gonzalez is the number one or the former first rounder. He has to be the guy, right? He has to be the person. Gonzo struggled a lot last year. A lot. He also showed flashes too. Then you have Jared Triolo, who helped over at third base when Ke'Bryan Hayes was out, became a fan favorite instantly, can spray the ball all over the yard, play Gold Glove caliber defense, can also play second base too. That's not even counting Chang, and I still need to know how to pronounce his name because I don't want to butcher it. Alika Williams, another option. And then you're looking at it now with the reintroduction of O'Neal Cruz. And last year they had the option of getting eyes on all these guys because they could slide guys to shortstop. If O'Neal Cruz stays healthy, folks, he's going to play 150 games in that position. He just is. Maybe 140 to be more reasonable. You're not going to have that same opportunity to slide those guys over. And I just mentioned 3 players that are definitely going to be in the conversation. And that's not even including if a certain somebody who just so happens to be their top hitting prospect in the system makes a massive jump this year, which is something that's not out of the weeds to say.
I mean, what you've
do you think about
described
second base?
what you've described is why everybody thinks that they're going to end up trading some of these guys. But the problem is they're all very similarly valued. You know, they
Yes.
really are. I could argue that I think Peguero has taken a little bit of a step forward, whereas Nick Gonzalez has taken a step back. If I'm an MLB team, I'm not wanting to deal for Nick Gonzalez after what he laid on paper last year in the majors. That was only 100 games, but that's some pretty epic swing and miss stuff there that it's really hard to justify moving forward with. So he's got to probably work some things out in AAA. And taking strikeouts away is something he's never really been able to do. So I'm not saying that he's a waste, but I also don't think he's a big trade asset. Peguero took a step. I'd like to see more. I think Jared Triolo is going to get some play there. I don't know why they keep talking about Connor Joe playing second base. There's no need for me to even see that, but they keep saying it.
I'm good. I'm good.
You can be good all you like. I have a feeling we're going to see him play there in the spring for some reason. And I think it's because they have him built into this Super 2 conversation, or not Super 2. Geez.
You can tell we're Pirates fans with Super 2 is the Freudian
super
slip.
utility conversation. I think I think they're trying to have him directly battle with like Jared Triolo for that spot, you know. So it could be just a weird spring where we just see a ton of different stuff, but to me, you got to give somebody a run. You got to let somebody really just have it on their own for a little bit And to me, that's got to be Leo Pagero is the one I'm expecting to step up. Sung Che Sheng, though, I'm going to tell you what, the dude can hit.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, he may not hit the way Pagero does, but he can hit. And he's got real good bat-to-ball skills, and I could see him making a jump this year and forcing his way into this conversation, really. I don't think he can play shortstop in the bigs, but second base, yeah. And I like him. He's a lot like Ha-Sung Kim.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched some of him play, and I mean, I guess I could see a little bit of that. And if that's the kind of player that he's going to be, sign me up. I
Very
think that kind of
structured, athletic, fast bat-to-ball skills. Really, he's got some fun tools. He really does. There's a reason he got protected. It wasn't, I mean, it wasn't because they just felt like they had to have an extra middle infielder.
Yeah. And you look at this battle again, and it's kind of different from the other ones just because of the starting pitching. You have the two spots for now. The outfield, yeah, you have one spot realistically because Reynolds and Sawinski are going to occupy two. But again, there is the possibility of injuries coming out there and all that other stuff.
And you're probably going to keep 5 or 6.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to keep guys there because obviously you also have guys like G1 Bay who can bounce back and forth between the infield and the outfield. And we know Ben Cherington and Derek Shelton love that. But going to make a final point with all of these things, Gary already outlined it, and it's something that they need to do this year. Enough of the interchanging guys every single day and not really giving them the opportunity to, like you said, have a decent sample size of, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even a month's time, where it's just Lee over Pagero, or it's just Edward Olivares or Palacios or whoever you decide to put in the outfield, or it's just Luis Ortiz as that back end of the rotation option where you give him 5 to 6, 7 starts before you really jump ship immediately. And I think that's one of the biggest gripes that a lot of people have with Derek Shelton is the constant changings of lineups. I get it, because part of it I also think is it's not really up to him sometimes what players are on the field every once in a while. I'm not saying he doesn't have some say in it, but we all know that he's getting chirped at to do certain things. But this year, I would like to see a little bit more lineup consistency. Now, obviously, if you're having a guy like Jack Sawinski who has those stretches where he's 2 for 26, it's fine, in my opinion, to change it then. But I think as a final sticking point with all these battles, whoever wins them, give them the first month. Give them all of April. Let them go out there and show what they can do. Let them go out there and develop a little bit, get their feet under them at the beginning of the year, and don't change things if they're not broken. If this ain't broke, don't fix it. That's really what I'll say about the Pittsburgh Pirates going into this.
Yep. And I would say if you're rooting for a storyline, like there's somebody that in your mind has to be whatever, I would not approach this season that way, because I really think you should approach this spring with a very open mind that you want the best players to win their job this spring. And I think you have the most open competition that you can honestly say you've seen here in Pittsburgh in the past 6 years.
Yeah.
With legitimate talent.
Yeah, there are no more Josh Van Meters on this team, folks. That's the joke that I always mention is there's no more John Nagowskis and Josh Van Meters at this point. You're actually talking about fringe MLB talent that could turn into everyday MLB talent at multiple positions. And spring's going to be very fun. And obviously, we're going to come back to this probably right before spring training because things might be different then. But we already know that we're going to be covering it here on the Locked On Pirates podcast, here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, check out Locked On Sports Today. It's the 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Make sure you check out Steel City Pirates, formerly Bucks in the Basement. I've had a story over there on G1 Bay already. Gary and Michael are cranking stuff out pretty much every day. Hopefully you checked out 5 Thoughts at 5 at 10:30. As I kept joking with everybody yesterday. Also, check out Gary's fan forum this week as well. I'll be back tomorrow. Gary will be back next Tuesday, more than likely. But until then, folks, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on the flip side.